Mr. Ambassador, until yesterday, the tariff taxes that the administration had placed began to look like, I've got a problem, so I'll shoot myself in one foot. I've got a problem, so I'll now shoot myself in the other foot. I mean, the morning, for those who think it's not hurting, the Wall Street Journal this morning says GM and Ford each said that rising commodity prices, primarily steel, shaved about $300 million from their second quarter results. Most of it they blamed on the metals tariffs. Both companies buy almost all their steel from U.S. producers whose prices have increased in reaction to the tariff. Steel accounts for 53% of the material in typical automobile, and aluminum 11%. In Tennessee, that's pretty bad news because we've got 929 auto parts suppliers. They almost all use steel and aluminum. 3 big car companies. That's 136,000 workers. That's a third of our manufacturing force. That's not good for us. And it's not good for a lot of other people in Tennessee. And Electrolux in Springfield canceled a $250 million expansion because of steel prices going up, even though they buy all their steel in the U.S. Our big tire companies have to buy cord for the tires from overseas because it's not made in the United States, so they pay an extra price. Bush Brothers cans a third of the beans in the United States. Its revenues are going down 8%, it thinks, because of steel, the steel-plated cans they have to buy. And we have a company in Dixon, Tennessee, that chose between China and the U.S., moved to Tennessee, then suddenly, on their gas grills, steel prices are up 40 cents because of us. Retaliatory tariffs raise it even more. So they're making a loss on every gas grill they export to Europe and Canada. They wish they had moved to China instead of the United States. Now that's the bad news. Now the good news is that what the president said at the G7, what he said about a week ago, and what he said yesterday, is that we're headed toward a zero tariff, zero subsidy policy. That's what it should be, he said. I agree with that, and I'd like to ask you a couple of things about how we get there. Obviously, we're familiar with such a thing. I mean, the North American Free Trade Agreement is essentially a zero tariff agreement with a few exceptions. Took us several years to get to that point until 2008, but we got there. Japan and Europe are negotiating the same kind of deal. So as we take a step toward a zero tariff agreement, which we would welcome in Tennessee, and I imagine in this country, would a reasonable step one be, say, to make the tariffs the same between the United States and Europe on cars and trucks, which would be to lower to 10% the tariff on trucks, light trucks, and 2.5% the tariff on cars. And as we begin to do this, my second question, and I'll let you take the rest of the time, how quickly then will we get rid of the steel and aluminum tariffs? Because if we're moving toward a zero tariff policy, obviously we don't want to raise the price of steel 40% in the United States, which we have this year, according to the steel indices, because you can't make a truck in Tennessee with steel up 40% and sell it competitively in the United States or export it to Europe. So how would that first step seem reasonable to you, the one I described? And number two, how quickly can we get rid of these steel and aluminum tariffs so we can be competitive in a zero tariff environment?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for that question. First of all, the basic philosophy that we have is that we want free trade without barriers. That's what the president wants. We don't see it. We see ourselves as being treated unfairly. So then the next question is, what do you do about that? One idea is to talk and see if over a period of time you can make change. Our sense is that that's been tried and tried and tried and tried, and the deficit goes up and up and up and up. So the president's idea is we have to do something more dramatic. We have to try to change
Well, in the short time we've got, what about the idea of the same tariff for cars and trucks in the United States and light trucks in the European Union?
Well, I would say, first of all, the idea of zero tariffs, zero subsidies, but also we need zero standards, right? We can't have standard barriers. We can't have non-tariff barriers to trade because we could have the same tariff and not be able to sell anything to somebody because they have a trade barrier. In my opinion, you can't cherry pick specific. You have to be careful cherry picking specific products like cars or trucks, because some country has an advantage in others and some doesn't. In the past, when we've had this
Well,
negotiation.
but you picked steel and aluminum, you cherry-picked them, and you drove up the price of steel 40% since January.
Well, I will talk separately about the steel and aluminum if you like, but just philosophically on what you're saying, I think you have to include, when you go to 0-0, a balanced package. It has to have agriculture as part of it. You have to do not just trucks and cars, which I believe would greatly favor the European Union in the case that you bring as opposed to the United States, but there are a lot of other manufacturing products that would greatly benefit the United States. And agriculture, for sure. Agriculture is one of the areas where we make world-class products, and a lot of other products that are made, and I could go through because I've seen letters and the like from members. So I think the idea, I agree with you, is completely right. The idea is to pick the number of things. We have a balanced package and move from where we are to an environment where you don't have tariffs, where you don't have subsidies, because that's an important part. You can't compete with someone who's subsidized. And we don't subsidize, so, for the most part. And then the third thing is you have to worry about non-tariff barriers to trade, which is a little more complicated, but you can't be in a position where you now have zero tariffs, they can ship and you can't ship there. And I can give you examples of all these. The final thing I would add is I think you have to do something on services to make a balanced package, because that's another area where the United States has a huge advantage. The idea of doing just trucks and cars by themselves strikes me as being something that would favor Europe and lead to an increase in the trade deficit and hurt the U.S. automobile manufacturers. On the issue of the 232, our objective is, the president's objective is, as we do these deals, that we, and we have done this in the case of Korea and some other countries, that we set up a mechanism whereby they don't pay those tariffs, as long as we're not in a position where they take all the benefit that's supposed to go to U.S. steel and aluminum producers. So in the case of Korea and others, we've set up a situation where they can ship duty-free in the United States up to an historic level, so that they don't get the benefit of it. But on the 232 generally, the first question you have is you have to conclude that there is a problem. Steel and aluminum are essential to national security, and that they were in jeopardy, and that prices were unfairly low. If you don't take that step, then the action doesn't make any sense. The president believes, I believe, that that was a necessary step. And then therefore, after that, the objective is to try to manage in a way so there's least amount of collateral damage while accomplish what we believe to be a good. But in the next round, I'd be happy to talk more about this with you, because I think it's the basic, and you and I have talked about these things, the basic idea, I think, is exactly what the president wants to do. He wants to get to a position where the U.S. is competing with countries specifically on a bilateral basis, and ultimately everyone on a no barrier, be it tariffs or anything else kind of basis, and then let the United States, let pure economics make the decision. And if that's the case, he's convinced and I'm convinced, and I know you personally are very convinced, we're going to win. We're going to do just great in an environment like that.